This episode is supported by MonsterJoysticks.com. Level up your Raspberry Pi with our all-in-one arcade kit using genuine Sanwa arcade parts. Welcome back, Cave Dwellers. We got to know the Amstrad 6128 in part 1. Now it's time to test, fix, and hopefully get the upgrade I always wanted. Let's dive in then, as there's a lot to cover today. Power for the 6128 was passed through by the monitor, but we don't have an Amstrad monitor, so I've bought a kit specifically for the task. The video output goes to a SCART connection, making it suitable for my TV, and both 5 and 12 volt power cables are supplied, so that should sort us out even without the monitor. A 30-year-old disk drive is going to need a service, which is a task you can complete with any level of technical ability, and we will cover that today. Replacing perished parts and giving it a good clean. This thing is pure filth. And if we get to a point where it's all working, well, you know we like to find modern ways to get the most out of old tech, and the icing on the cake for me is this external floppy drive emulator. Based on the HXC Universal Floppy Drive emulator, this allows us to load programs from an SD card and is in a snazzy case. But let's not get ahead of ourselves just yet, there's much to do. We gave our system board a clean up in part 1, now we have the power cables and we don't see any dodgy looking capacitors, so I decided to perform some basic continuity checks as a final precaution before sending power into the board. It was bought untested, so let's apply a little bit of caution. I've set the multimeter to the continuity test symbol. When a closed circuit exists between our probes, it will give us a beep. I'm using the floppy drive ground cable here to test the ground, and then checking the ground pin on each key component to ensure that there's continuity between the component and ground, and then we'll repeat this with the 5 and 12 volt lines. If you watched my Acorn Electron series, you'll recall we performed the same tests with that machine. Many may choose to skip this step, but a heads up on a broken trace or an intermittent connection on a component caused by dry solder, for example, can save time and damage in the long term, so I do like to do this. When I was satisfied with the basic continuity, I decided to service a part which is known to fail on the 6128, and that's the power switch. A continuity test should show the circuit is closed when the switch is in the on position, signified by a beep, and open when in the off position. The switch is indeed working, but given its reputation, let's strip it down and clean it anyway for good measure. 30 years of shared knowledge tends to be enough time to understand the shortcomings of most retro machines, and a little preventative maintenance can go a long way. The metal casing pries open to reveal a very simple device. There's our plastic switch here, and then there's a small piece of metal which will pop out. And that's all there is to it really, just don't lose the parts. I'm going to clean the switch up with a squirt of electrical contact cleaner. You can find this in electronics and also car repair stores, so it should be easy to source. I gave the casing a quick squirt and a clean with a cloth, using a small screwdriver to get right down inside. What we've got at the bottom of the casing is this small metal contact, which we want to clean up. And we'll also clean up the small piece of metal that we popped out. When we put it back together, you can see exactly why. The plate sits on a pivot and is either making contact, closing the circuit, or it's not and the circuit is open, and its position is dictated by the plastic switch which sits atop it. Gunk can accumulate or metal can oxidize in the switch, preventing the circuit from closing, which is where the common complaint of this faulty switch comes from, and the result is that the machine just won't turn on. Now it's all cleaned, I'll put it back together and this should serve us well. So, shall we plug it in and see what happens? Why not? I'm feeling lucky. Just look at that. The 6128 lives up to its reputation of being one of the hardest 8-bits around, enduring years of neglect, a family of woodlice, and who knows what else. It's good news, but the system board is only one part of the story, and this refurb is far from over yet. Let's roll up our sleeves then and tackle this disgusting keyboard. The 6128 has a hardy reputation, but it's certainly not remembered for its keyboard. It's not remembered for being good or particularly bad, it's just distinctly average, not memorable. With the aid of my trusty keycap pulling tool, we'll see why, and give it a full service. So each key comprises of 2 springs, one to give the key its action so it pops back up, and then the small inner spring to contact the keyboard membrane and register a key press. It's pretty crude, but it works. Let's go through the keyhole. What do we see? It's the keyboard membrane and the pad that the key makes contact with, somewhere in there under all that filth, and we really do need to get that cleaned up. Any dirt between the spring and the membrane will, over time, with each press, cause the keyboard membrane to deteriorate, and that damage will prevent key presses from registering. So let's remove all the keys and clean everything up. As I rip these keys off, I'm looking for 2 things. One is that the springs don't launch across the room, never to be found again, and they're very good at doing that. The other is for rust, like we have here. Moisture, a spilled drink, perspiration over a game of Chucky Egg. We don't know what caused it, but it's not the only rusting spring I found here, and we'll want to take care of them when we finished stripping. 2 springs to be aware of are those under the spacebar. You'll see that they're slightly smaller, so just look out for that one putting it all back together again, or you'll end up with 2 sunken keys and a raised spacebar. Dust. More dust on the membrane, and it's easy to see now how a key could crush any debris into the membrane and cause that damage. And it really doesn't take a lot. Here's the membrane from a ZX Spectrum which isn't working, and you can see, I hope, if we zoom in here, how the traces can be worn away. And I've also seen traces completely crumble and just fall away inside the membrane. There's not much you can do to save that. So do be careful when removing the membrane from the 6128. Don't roll it up like a poster, and only give it a very light, gentle clean and not a harsh scrub. And maybe a gentle rub with some contact cleaner on the end of the ribbon cable. Just be really careful with it. The plastic casing, on the other hand, is just a lump of plastic, so scrub that all you like to get it clean. A gentle brush is really useful for the harder to reach places. This is just a regular shoe brush, so it's softer than a scrubbing brush, and you won't scratch up the plastics with it. The keys I want to give a good clean to, but I don't want to risk water getting trapped inside the little springs, causing them to rust, or seep down to the keyboard membrane over time. How do we tackle this one then? Well, I'm going to dip each key into some washing up liquid and let it get to work on shifting the grease, before giving each key a wipe down and, bang, the dirt is gone, as Barry Scott used to say. Where is Barry now, I wonder? The last job to do on the keyboard then is to clean up the rusty springs, and we'll do that with some acid. I'm using some cider vinegar, you could try lemon juice, other vinegars or whatever's to hand, and you'll find after a good soaking of about 45 minutes the rust will fall away. And you can see it coming off here on my finger. When you're happy it's all off, rinse them off to remove the vinegar and dry them. I used a hot air gun just to dry them off quickly, because if you don't then the spring may end up tarnished and not silver. It will still work, but it's nice to keep them shiny and new looking. And with that, we can move on. The 3-inch disk drive here is a very common point of failure in the machine. If you're buying a CPC and the drive hasn't been serviced, then consider the task a must, because if it's working, it's likely hanging by a thread. A drive servicing kit can be purchased for the task with all the bits you need, and I have one here. Pair it up with some basic tools and we're ready to go. The first job is to unscrew the drive board to gain access. The first job is to get a screwdriver that fits and then unscrew the drive board to gain access. The board won't come far away from the drive, so don't force it or you'll break it. We just need to pop 2 cables out so that we have enough space to work within. And once inside, we can immediately see that there's no way this drive would work, as the drive belt is wrapped tightly around the capstan. This is one of 2 fatalities you'll find here. It either coils up like this, or it explodes all over the inside of the drive. Either way, we need to remove all trace of the drive belt, clean up the drive and replace the belt. I was able to pick out the bulk of the belt and then get the final remnants off with a little alcohol and some scrubbing. It is important to get it all off because any bits of old belt can cause the new belt to slip, and we don't want to be caught slipping in life as in our disk drives. After a quick clean-up, it's time to fit our new belt, which is a fiddly operation, but with a little bit of patience and some tweezers we can hook the belt around the large pulley at the back of the drive and then stretch it over the capstan. And that is our new belt fitted. We now turn our attention to the read-write head. Guess what? If this is dirty, it can neither read nor write to and from disks, so we need to keep this in tip-top shape. The head gets a clean with some cleaning fluid on this lollipop stick, and we'll give it a gentle rub down. Not too harsh, just let the fluid do its work, and then the rest of the drive compartment also needs a good clean up. It's absolutely filthy. Finally, this little stepper motor has a worm shaft. That's the groovy metal shaft here, and we want to give that some fresh grease to keep it turning happily. The included instructions advise Vaseline as a suitable substitute, but this deserves better. Take a few minutes to get the proper stuff. And with a final brush, the drive is serviced and it's onto the case. The injection moulded case is sturdy, but it does flex a little bit when disassembled, so be a little bit careful when working with it. I've brushed away all of the debris, and then it's into the washing up bowl for a good wipe down. The colour of the system was never a deep black, it was more like a charcoal, so I'd like to work out some of the scuffs and the scrapes and get it as close to that as possible. A technique I use on faded plastics on my car is to apply a little heat with a heat gun, and it brings the colour back to the surface, on black plastics that is. So I experimented with that technique here, and I have to say it made little difference. The plastic here reacts differently, or we're so close to the original colour it's just not noticeable. So I abandoned that idea and I worked in some black restoration treatment. This one is called Bono Black, but there are loads of alternatives out there at car shops, and this did a great job of working out the scuffs and the scrapes and bringing the plastic back to life again. I may also apply this to my CD32, I was so pleased with the result. It should keep the finish for a nice long time because the machine isn't being ravaged by the sun or other conditions that a car has to endure, and it's easily reapplied to top up when it's needed. A few more tasks then to take this machine through to completion. A little contact cleaner in the volume dial and a clean-up of any remaining black plastics in the system. A brush down of the internal speaker cone and I also cleaned up the ports like the 3.5-inch headphone jack here with some contact cleaner. And then it was time for reassembly, to finally enjoy owning a CPC once again. A small amount of cable management is worth following when putting it all back together. There's a clip for the floppy cable to sit in, and I've removed and replaced all of the original cable ties and cleaned down the cables. No dust or wood lice in here, thank you very much. The keys snap back into place on the keyboard, and some of the larger keys also need to be snapped back into their metal arms on the rear. This is so the whole key presses down regardless of where you put your finger on it. The spacebar, for example, would be very wobbly without the extra support. The gate array did get a new dollop of thermal paste, and I put the heatsink back on, and then everything screwed back together. And so, what became of that crusty, unloved and untested Amstrad we found in the classified ads? Well, why don't you take a look? While it didn't put our electronics chops to the test, it was a nice test of elbow grease, mechanical repairs, maintenance and TLC to give this 6128 a new lease of life. The floppy drive is happily flashing away, and the single disc I currently own, Fun School 2, loads up first time, and the lack of a genuine Amstrad monitor hasn't held us back at all, thanks to the replacement leads. The keys are all behaving, so there's no damage to the keyboard membrane, and now it's cleaned up, hopefully it will last much longer than it otherwise would have. And yes, I can recreate the very first program I ever wrote. 10 print, 20 go to 10. Isn't that where we all started? So now we have a happy 6128, I want to share with you an episode dedicated to using the machine. My friend Tim is coming to visit with a box of discs which we'll enjoy playing. I'm going to load a program the old-fashioned way by typing it in from a book, and we'll see if it's as frustrating as I remember. And then we'll plug in our modern day floppy emulator to see if it transforms our machine and discuss if the 6128 is a good choice for the modern collector. Join me for all that and more in part 3, and for today, thank you for watching and take care. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting the channel using the links in the description, visit monsterjoysticks.com/RMC, or simply subscribe and come back for more soon.